Okay, so like every Zelda game is really broken. We can all agree things just kind of happen in these games. And where things get really interesting is where the game decides things are too much and crashes. For some, it doesn't even take that much. Sometimes you can just do seemingly random things and uproot the entire work of the game's dev team and destroy the game. These glitches appear to exist in almost all Zelda games, so I got the idea to speedrun crashing them, and they won't have my ear. And so today I'll be showing how to crash all the Zelda games as fast as possible, and breaking it down so that maybe you can also crash your favorite Zelda game, just by looking at it. Starting with Zelda 1, this game is pretty easy to crash. We start by naming our save file Zelda and key mashing on the rest of the save files, which will put us in New Game Plus and do a secret third thing. Once we're in the game, we just need to grab the sword, head into the second dungeon, and get the ocarina, which is what we're going to use to crash the game. And now we just need to go to the graveyard. Here, we're going to spawn 10 ghosts and press the sword and ocarina at the same time, which does this. The whistle is supposed to spawn stairs here in New Game Plus, but since we spawned all those ghosts, we ended up reaching the game's limit on movable objects that can be around, which leads to the game using our file names as code to run, and getting crashes. The footage I just showed you was gathered from the Wii and Japanese original, but I also tested this out on Switch, and I'm actually going to try and crash most of the versions of the games that exist and see what's different, because I'm insane and it's fun. On Switch I got a lot more varied crashes, like this one which gives me an error screen in-game, or one where I get reset to the start of the map. But the most common result I got was having the emulator just kick me out of the game and not show me anything cool. On Switch, the emulators try to be self-aware and kick you out of the game before anything bad happens. But the emulator can't catch all of these crashes, and funnily enough, this isn't considered a crash. This is just normal, and it's by far the most interesting result I got on Switch. Looking at Zelda 2, this game is surprisingly a lot easier to crash than the original. All that you need to do is go into a fight, kill 10 enemies, grab this item, and leave. The game is already dead and it's barely been half a minute. What I did here is get a rare item drop, which happens after you kill 10 enemies in a row. One of these can trigger an instant level up, and leveling up when you leave crashes immediately. On to Link to the Past, and this game is a little more involved to actually get crashed. We first have to go through a bunch of text, walk to the castle, and grab the sword, and then jump off this ledge and reset. Doing this sets up a glitch that we'll use to crash the game, so that when we restart, go back into the castle, and get hit by this guard, we're out of bounds. We can now walk anywhere within the walls of the castle, and indeed anywhere within the dungeon map. It may not be obvious, but Link to the Past has technically 3 overworlds. The main overworld, the dark world, and the dungeon world, where literally all of the caves, dungeons, and interiors exist. All of those are on one map, and because we're out of bounds, we can literally walk from Hyrule Castle to anywhere that exists, such as the Triforce, and beat the game. But instead of that, we're going to go to one portion of the map that's assigned to nowhere, and get a crash. This crash is not recognized by the emulator whatsoever and keeps going, and creates so many sounds. Moving on to Link's Awakening, this game is a lot easier to crash than the previous ones, which is saying something. All that we need to do is wake up, grab our sword, and defeat 2 enemies. And doing that will set us up to wrong warp to here. This is an out-of-bounds, really broken dungeon that you can access at any time in the game by going to this doghouse. Where you go is determined entirely by how many enemies you've defeated, which is why I killed 2 guys. 2 guys equals here. Inside, we're going to navigate very carefully down this path that I figured out, being cautious with our steps, as most places that we step will kill us or get us stuck on a wall, which is basically death. Once we get to this normal-looking area, we're going to enter this room from the side and crash. Miraculously, the Switch actually recognizes that this is a crash and kicks us out of the game, and prevents us from hearing the wonderful beeping that you would hear on original hardware. And more interestingly, on the 3DS, for some reason when you do this glitch, it will crash. Like, your whole console will die and reboot. I don't know why this glitch is that potent on my console, but the emulator just can't handle it. And because we're able to crash Zelda 1, 2, and Link's Awakening, this means we can in theory crash every single game on the Zelda Game & Watch. So, I got one. Here it is. This is a dedicated piece of hardware that can literally only play 2 NES games and a Game Boy game, and not in color. I first went off to Zelda 1 to try and do the arbitrary code execution, and it didn't work, so a bit of a problem there. It turns out that on the Game & Watch, the version of Zelda they're using patched arbitrary code execution. It's not patched on Animal Crossing, or the Game Boy, or the Wii, or the Switch. It's never been patched until this console came out, which is saying something, and now means we need a new something to crash the game. So after researching some more, it turns out we have some options. If you go to any dungeon in the game, walk up to the very top of the room where there's going to be a doorway, and press left and right in front of a doorway, you'll crash. Like left and right, what I mean, like left and right at the same time. Like you press the left button and the right button on your controller, which sounds impossible, but it's actually very doable on the NES controller if you just have determination. So with that being a thing, I went and tried that on the Game & Watch and wasn't able to get the game to crash this way. My first thought was that I was just not pressing the buttons correctly, maybe the D-pad's kind of weird. So to fix this, I took the entire console apart and then tried to press left and right on the physical pads on the console in the dungeon, and it still didn't work. So the reason for this is kind of simple, sort of. It turns out that a lot of games for the NES, Game Boy, and Super Nintendo will break completely if you hold left and right at the same time. So emulators will usually prevent you from doing this, and Nintendo's emulators always do. So that aside, there's luckily another way we can crash Zelda 1 in the Game & Watch. So here's what I ended up doing. I went and started the game, grabbed the sword, and defeated these very specific enemies who have a chance of dropping bombs. And with those, blew up this wall for a potion and went to the nearest dungeon, which is just the first one. Potioning as you enter a dungeon is a very easy way you can crash it, apparently, which finally lets us break Zelda on the Game & Watch. We can also just use this trick to get faster times in our rankings, so I went back to the game in the original hardware and did the left and right glitch there to update our time. And it's faster, yeah. Back to the Game & Watch, and Zelda 2 is basically the exact same as the Switch. The EXP glitch still works, and you can get the crash very fast, which just leaves Link's Awakening. So, like I said, this version doesn't have color. This is not Link's Awakening DX, it's Link's Awakening, period. This is a version I didn't bother with earlier because it's very easy to forget that it exists, and they don't even re-release this unlike modern consoles. But it turns out the original has different glitches and is actually much faster to crash than the colored version. This version of the game is a lot more broken, as anytime you go to a loading boundary, you can pause and it'll load a little wrong and keep your spot at the edge of the map, letting you go anywhere. The Game & Watch version makes this even more interesting because the developers also went to the effort of patching the doghouse glitch dungeon in this version. Sort of. But what they did is make it so that it always sends you to the beach, which is convenient. As for this version, all that we need to do to crash it is go south from the beach and enter this dungeon to find a place to crash it. Which means the Game & Watch version is actually the fastest version of the game to crash, period. With the doghouse warp, the dungeon entry, and our quick out of bounds trip, I was able to get a 1 minute time for the crash, and a fun beep as a bonus. And with that, we've defeated the Zelda Game & Watch. I don't know why they felt it was important to patch all these 30-year-old glitches, but we figured it out anyways. On to Ocarina of Time. This game is surprisingly very simple to break. I'm sure you guys are already aware how broken the game is. All we need to do is leave the house, talk to Saria, jump off, and begin doing this very precise ritual. What this is going to do is put us in the water in a very precise angle where if we dive, the game stops. Also, on Switch, the emulator doesn't realize we've crashed the game, so we can kind of just chill. Majora's Mask, on the other hand, takes a little more effort to crash than the last one. What we're going to do is instead finish the intro, become human, and leave from North Clocktown over to this pillar. Once this little bomb guy comes up to us, we're going to roll and pause, and then hold L and barely down on the control stick. And after we unpause, we crash. You might be familiar with this glitch that lets you fly around in Majora's Mask, and what we did is what happens when you do this wrong. And this glitch, of course, also works on Switch with the added bonus of hard crashing the entire emulator. The Oracle games exist and have a whole mechanic of the games linking together that we can take advantage of to crash them. By typing in these passwords that we get from the previous game, we're able to start in New Game Plus, which is a little buggy. We unfortunately have to complete the first and second dungeon in both games to be able to crash them, but after that, all that we have to do is go back to the village and start talking to these NPCs. This couple has a baby that progresses based on beating the game the first time, and will grow up and class into such things as a warrior or an artist after you beat your second dungeon in your second playthrough. And unfortunately for the game, this entire mechanic is really broken. Based on what you say to the family when you visit them, the kid will soon class into one of the jobs that are available. And if you witness this class change and don't talk to anybody and leave, the next time you walk into the house, he will accidentally class change again and have +1 added to his class. And if he was already previously the highest class, which I made him, he will then become something that is invalid and broken and crash. For Oracle Seasons, nothing too out of the ordinary happens, other than on the 3DS, where the console tells you you need a Game Boy Color, which, it's true, the 3DS is not a Game Boy. For Oracle of Ages, the game takes a little longer to crash, taking 10 minutes more than its companion game. And on original hardware, that is the end of the story, but on the 3DS and Switch, you get a lot more than that. Starting with the Switch, this version has a lot of weird things to offer. So yes, the game crashes, but you also get lots of really weird stuff. Walking into the house with a corrupted baby gives me this flickering and weirdness a lot of the time. You can also get fairies that join you and distort the music. It's pretty weird. And then there's the 3DS. The 3DS version is really bizarre. I spent days researching just this version of the game because what happens when you enter the house is frankly crazy. The 3DS version is much more resilient to crashing, and where other versions of the game would fold, this version instead shows you really bizarre results. Like this effect where the entire game blurs together, which I use to fill up the whole screen, obviously. Also, sometimes the game would literally give up and just reset to the title screen and also delete my save file. Something else unique about this version is that only in 3DS, if you enter the right door of the house, you'll get this clone of Link who you can actually control. And if you go to the other room and come back and hold up, you'll control him and make him go through the walls, and you'll go into this underwater area where there's clocks everywhere. Also, only on Switch and 3DS TM, you can trigger a warp to the very final boss if you leave the house and corrupt the baby again, which apparently speedrunners didn't know about, which blows my mind. And now we move on to the Game Boy Advance, DS, Wii era. These are the games I grew up with, so I'm more familiar with them, and it turns out they're all really broken. The first game we'll be looking at is Four Swords. This game came bundled with Link to the Past, and you probably didn't play it as it requires multiple people. Luckily, the DS version exists and has single player and more glitches. To break the game, all that we need to do is start off, skip the intro, and go to Death Mountain. In this game, each level is basically several levels in one, as they all include several variants that are completely different. We're looking for a version of Death Mountain that starts off with a couple rocks nearby, and after resetting over and over to get that layout, we're gonna go past the rocks, activate this switch to spawn a key, and place one Link above the key and one Link on this door. The game gives you a whistle to reunite both Links instantly, and doing so with the setup will cause one Link to grab the key while the other's pushing on the door, which is apparently too much for the game, so it crashes. This is one of the fastest crashes we've had, and the next game, Four Swords Adventures, is even more prone to crashing. When I started researching this game, I assumed we'd need to do this crash where you go out of bounds and the game just kind of dies. This takes a fair amount of time to reach, however, so I got to experimenting and seeing if there's other ways to crash the game. This being a GameCube game, we have a lot more of tools at our disposal than we had with the previous entries. The simple fact we're playing on a disc is something we can mess around with. If you take it out, the game will actually work for a little while, and then notice, which is something that you can glitch other games with. We also have memory cards, which are a thing that you can take out, and the game will have to cope and eventually notice that. And we also have the reset button, which on all previous consoles functioned as just power cycling the console, turning it on and off. However, on the GameCube and Wii, it functions more like a soft reset, where the game will think about it and then stop what it's doing and begin resetting. All three of these things are items we have to play with, and I got to experimenting by just taking out the disc over and over again while resetting, while taking up the memory card, which actually got results. I found the crash method through this, and it's really easy. As you can see here, all that you need to crash the game is plug in a Game Boy, turn on the game, and reset it a couple times, and it'll crash. This is a permanent black screen that the game has no way of getting out of, and the console is totally locked up and unresponsive. I had to go and film this with the camera because just seeing the gameplay would make no sense, but this is real, it works, and it's by far our fastest crash we've got so far, coming in under 10 seconds. Wind Waker, on the other hand, actually requires us to play the game to crash it, and our run starts out just like any other speedrun. We hop off the tower and gauge speed for a few minutes, and then zip off the Dragon Roost where we get the baton. And this item is all that we need to crash the game. With it, we're going to jump over to this ledge and fall off as we pull out the baton, which triggers a glitch called Storage. Storage allows you to prevent and store any cutscenes happening and save it for later. And with that activated, all that we have to do is walk into the water and drown. Drowning will get stored and cancelled, which the game does not like at all, so it'll crash. And after crashing Wind Waker, I wasn't done with the game just yet, as I wanted to see if we could crash the official Wind Waker demo. At the time, Nintendo was getting really into re-releasing old games and just giving games demos at home. And in the interest of being thorough, I went and researched these re-releases too. So, we're going to talk about demos now. The Zelda Collector's Edition disc includes a demo for Wind Waker and 3 save files on board. This can be speedrun and crashed, as all you have to do is choose the save file that's in Dragon Roost, leave and equip the baton, and we're now in a room with water and the Wind Waker, which means it's already over. I ended up needing this small rock to get a Wind Waker dive, but after getting storage with it, it was as simple as jumping in the water and drowning for a really fast crash on the demo. None of the other games on the Collector's Edition disc are too different or interesting. I did crash them all and they work the same as the originals, but where things get really weird is with Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing includes tons of NES games, including The Legend of Zelda. I went into it wanting to mess around with the arbitrary code execution, and it turns out that wasn't even necessary to crash the game because of a small quirk in the emulator. The emulator used in Animal Crossing is the same one used in the Collector's Edition disc, and for playing Metroid and Metroid Prime 2. But those emulators are updated and came after, and they just work better. So for Animal Crossing, I was shocked to find that since this is the very first version of their very first emulator, there is zero protection against the left or right and up and down glitch. And because you're playing in a GameCube controller and the D-pad is mapped to the joystick and the D-pad, this is an extremely crashable game. All that you need to do to break Zelda in Animal Crossing is go into a single dungeon, press left on your joystick, and right on your D-pad. That does not require contortion, it doesn't require disassembling your control. It's so easy. I don't think anybody knew this quirk of Animal Crossing until now, but it exists, and you can left and right, up and down to your heart's content in this version. And after that, the next demo I looked at was a demo of Ocarina of Time and Super Smash Bros. Brawl. As you may have heard, speedrunners have been able to beat the game within this demo, and as you may expect, crashing the game within it is also super easy. All that we need to do is, same as before, leave Link's house and do our little water trick, and we've now fully crashed Smash Bros. Brawl from Ocarina of Time. There's no leaving it. You're stuck here playing crashed Brawl. And finally, dipping our toes back into the mainline games, we have Twilight Princess. These games are more broken than you could possibly imagine. They are possibly the most broken Zelda games. They're not stable and can be crashed at a moment's notice. All that you need to do for these is to start up the game and become able to actually play it and pause. And if you go to the settings menu and open that as you reset the game, it's over. This is something that destroys the game in mere seconds, and it works the exact same on the Wii version as well. Twilight Princess also has other glitches you can use to crash it, and I went experimenting with the Wii version a little more, as was a very fun trick you can do on that version. There's a glitch you can do on Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword called Back in Time, where you can control Link on the title screen by resetting the game as you die or respawn. We can do this from basically the very start of Twilight Princess, and if you press the A button on the title screen, you'll crash. But the fun doesn't stop there, as if you press this button combination, you'll get the official Nintendo debug screen. This is what the developers used whenever the game crashed, and they wanted to figure out why and fix it. And this feature is still left in the game intact. In fact, it's left in most 3D Zeldas. It's inside Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask. We just couldn't access it on those other runs, as the Wind Waker crash is so deep the game can't even pull up the screen. And for the N64 games, those can only be done on original hardware, and I don't have one in 64. The actual crash debugger that we have lets us view a couple of things about the game, such as what code is running, how much RAM the game's using, basically just nerd stuff, but it's cool that it's there. And before we leave the Twilight Princess era, we're gonna top it off with Link's crossbow training. This is basically a glorified targeting minigame, but it surprisingly has glitches and can be crashed. But before we get into that, we need to talk about what exactly is a crash. We're interested in doing glitches that hard crash the game, which can be confused at sometimes with soft locks. There are plenty of glitches you can do in Zelda games that would get the game permanently stuck in like an animation for this, a soft lock, and they're different from crashes because you can just soft reset the game or pause to get out of it. These are different from crashes where the game just stops entirely and you have to like unplug your console, or the game might just kick you out of it entirely in the modern consoles. This is an important distinction because in Link's crossbow training, there are a fair amount of soft locks that you can just do. I found one you can do from the title screen where you just open this menu and reset at the same time, and the result is that the game resets you to the title screen and all your inputs are blocked. Despite what the game says, none of your button presses will do anything, but you can just reset again or press the home button and the game will fix itself, so the game is functional, just a little stuck. There's also a glitch you can do in a later level where the game just completely stops and gets stuck. It will not progress, it will not do anything, but you still have a cursor and can open the home menu and reset the game, so it's not a crash. When I started this project, there actually were no documented crashes for this game, but rest assured, I got them. I started a run of this game, going through all the initial levels to get to the Hyrule Field one, and from there I did a glitch by pausing the game as we enter Sunset, which lets me control Link while the menu's up. An interesting thing you can do with this glitch is that any menu option you choose will be stored and activated the next time you press the menu. And what I found is that if you store it going to the level select, and right as the game goes from sunset to nighttime, activate the menu option, and reset, the combination of forcing the game to load nighttime, the level select, and the title screen will cause the game to get permanently stuck. We now have a white screen with no cursor and no ability to reset, and the console is completely locked up. So, a crash. After all of that, we have the DS games, and we're going to be playing Phantom Hourglass on Japanese, as that version has a couple more glitches than the English version. To crash the game, we're going to first have to go through the tutorial and do some boating in the very first dungeon. And after that, we eventually gain access to the shovel. The shovel is very broken on Japanese, and you can crash the game on command by digging a hole and de-equipping the shovel, which confuses the game enough to crash. This also just creates a really odd crash sound. And next up is Spirit Tracks. This game is a very special case. The game uniquely is a crash that is very easy to pull off, but takes tons and tons of time to get there. The only crash I could find is one you can do in this minigame, and to get to this minigame, we need to do a lot. So we start up the game, going through the tutorial, and the first dungeon, and the second dungeon, and the third, and hours later, we can finally unlock this minigame and break it due to an oversight. If we get Link to the lowest health possible and enter the minigame, we can then let ourselves get hit at the end, and the game will crash. The impact from the enemy is supposed to kick you out of the minigame, but on 1.0 of this game, the developers missed that, giving us, barely just barely, a crash we can do. Looking at Skyward Sword, this game is the same back-in-time title screen glitch as its predecessors, which we're going to use to crash the game. We start off and go through a couple of cutscenes, and the moment that we're able to, jump off of this ledge a couple times to die. Resetting the game while choosing to continue will give us the back-in-time glitch, and while this is used in speedruns for tons of things, it's also a very volatile glitch, as any moment that you want, you can crash the game by pausing to look at the map. And now we're going to jump into the Wii U and 3DS games, starting with Ocarina of Time. This version is very different from the originals, and crashing it takes a little more effort as water isn't going to cut it this time. Once we gain control of Link and exit his house, we're going to head into the forest and go to the specific room with these Deku Scrubs. We're going to let them hit us a couple of times and walk in front of this grotto, and if we get hit by them at the moment we enter, Link will fall perpetually. In this condition, if we go back to the title screen, what's going to happen is that we're going to die and get sent back to Impa's house in title screen mode. This is a glitch a little similar to Back in Time, and it's also just as unstable, as if we leave Impa's house in title screen mode, the game will instead permanently lock up. Next up is A Link Between Worlds, And this is a very complicated game to crash. We're going to start out and go through the game's initial cutscenes, and the moment we're set loose, head over to this cave entrance, and glitch inside. This lets us access Death Mountain really early, and without a sword, there's not much we can do, but we can, however, access the statue and then die, which will respawn us back at our house and with Ravio. Doing this trick actually skips tons of cutscenes and portions of the intro, and we can just now buy items from him. From here, we're actually going to leave and go head off to unlock the sword and item menu, and after encountering Yuga, get sent back to our house again. We're now fully unleashed and ready to access all of the game, and we're going to leave and grind for some cash before grabbing tons of items that we're going to use to crash the game. We're headed towards the Tower of Hera, which requires climbing Death Mountain, which has one small issue. We don't have the ability to enter walls, but skip this, we're instead going to line link up in front of these ledges, get hit by these rocks, and get sent over the gaps. And by combining these with a couple of lucky heart drops, we're able to traverse all of these rooms, get to the top of the mountain, and access the Tower of Hera. The first floor of the dungeon also requires the ability to enter walls, so we're going to do a precise glitch by getting our sword lined up with the spike, and with the bomb's help, make it up to the second floor. And from here, we're now ready to crash the game. On the second floor, we're going to set up the trick with this bomb and the tornado, and enter out of bounds. And all we need to do from here is go up a couple more floors and fall off the tower and reset the game. Doing all of this sets up a really weird visual corruption, and with that active, all we need to do is open a file and pause, and that pause will bring the game to its knees and permanently crash it. Jumping into Wind Waker's re-release, this run is going to start out looking very familiar. We're going to jump off the tower, gather up speed, and then go to Dragon Roost. The storage glitch we used here last time has unfortunately been patched, so we're gonna have to head inside and work up to a new trick. To crash the game, we have to get to the very top of the dungeon and get its item, which is a little more challenging than you'd expect because we don't have a sword. Since we skipped straight here, we have no direct way to do combat, which means any enemies that we encounter have to be defeated by throwing anything in our vicinity and taking their swords. This gets really weird when it comes to fighting the mid-boss, but it all works out, and we at last obtain the grappling hook. After we save and quit, we're gonna get strangely sent back to Outsets, and the moment we pull out the grappling hook and hold down on the joystick, we begin accessing exponential speed growth, which has a cap, and that crashes. Hyrule Warriors is up next, and while this game doesn't have too many glitches, it does, however, have a couple of crashes we can do. Looking into the game, I found that there's a pretty well-known crash on the Death Mountain level, where if you spawn Camp Darunia and defeat him as he spawns, there's a small chance of the game crashing. This trick, however, didn't work for me, and after trying it over and over, I was not able to get any Darunia crash on the Wii U version, and so, seeking out other answers for crashes, I went to the Switch, which has a pretty easy crash you can do with fairies. Starting out, we're going to go into a brand new save file, beat the first level, and enter adventure mode after that, and unlock a fairy. Taking a look at our fairy afterwards, we can dress her up, decorate, all of these things, and none of this matters because we're actually going to just leave and loop back and forth over and over. I don't know why, but for some reason this game has a weird memory leak issue where if you do this process over and over for 15 minutes, the game will guaranteed crash and just stop happening. Majora's Mask is up next, and it's a very, very weird game to crash. This version of the game introduces a lot of new glitches that weren't in the original. And a lot of these tricks also happen to be frame perfect, meaning you need to pause the game over and over to actually pull these off. This is significant because the game also happens to have a glitch where if you pause the game and go to the home menu over and over, there is always a small chance you'll just crash, which is pretty huge. The frequency of the crashes you get actually varies on the type of 3DS you're using, and according to the pros, it's most unreliable on an original 3DS with an extra circle pad, which means I had to buy one. This is the Circle Pad Pro for the 3DS XL. It plugs into your console, gives you an extra joystick, and requires batteries. Apparently, when this device is on low battery, it becomes unstable and makes the console liable to crash very, very easily, which is great, but unfortunately was not my experience at all. For me, being in low batteries just meant it disconnected and the batteries would eventually die, and that's it. And while I would have loved to get involved with this item's madness, I didn't find any use for it, and I managed to get a really fast crash without it at all. I ended up using my new 3DS as it was giving me crashes in just a few minutes by just starting up the game and mashing the home button once the title screen shows you Clocktown. Crashing here is completely guaranteed, it just comes down to luck as when it'll happen. And while most attempts took me a few minutes, I was very lucky on one attempt to get a crash in only 1:40, which is an insanely fast crash. And we never even had to play the game, we just went to the title screen. Looping over to Twilight Princess once more, this version on the Wii U is really weird. It's not like the previous remakes where they changed tons of things, it's basically just a straight port, and that extends to the glitches. Basically nothing was taken out, and while we no longer have a reset button to access all of those glitches, there are tons of tricks we can use instead. After starting up the game, we're going to go through a bunch of tutorials and try and get the sword and a bottle. With these, we're going to go back to the town, beat up this sign, and grab a piece of it and drink milk. Link will mysteriously drop the sign piece as he drinks, but he still thinks the piece is in his hands, meaning if you try and throw it, the game will get confused and crash. And to top off the 3DS and Wii U games, we have Triforce Heroes. This game is a consistent crash you can do in 4-3, and while you don't start with World 4 unlocked, getting into it is surprisingly very easy. After starting up and gaining access to the level select, we're going to head into 1-4, which you can start from the very start of the game, and you don't actually have to play it, as the game lets you skip most of the levels in any instance, meaning we can just walk into it, skip everything, and voila, 1-4 is done, and we've unlocked several more worlds. Heading into 4-3, after grabbing the items here, we're now ready to crash the game, and it's very simple. The area we spawn into is right below an enemy fight, and the enemies only spawn once all 3 links are up there. What we're going to do is bring a couple of links up there and set them up so that one of them is beneath this ledge. From here, we're going to bring all of the links up and ready our previous link with this hammer. He'll drop the hammer during the cutscene, which will actually prevent an enemy from spawning all the way, and the enemy will pause permanently if we slash him, and the game will crash permanently if we hammer him. Since this is a multiplayer game, we can of course do this across multiple consoles. You could technically use this to grief online if the server still existed. So, of course, I went and grabbed 3 consoles and synced them all up, speedran through the intro, and crashed all of the units, all at once. And finally, we have the Switch games. Breath of the Wild isn't too hard to crash. After we clip out of bounds, all that we need to do is go to the snowy area and talk to Zelda, which will unlock our map, which we can use to crash the game. After this, if we just walk back to the field area we came from and walk close to this bush, we'll land right in front of the cutscene trigger that starts the opening cutscene. Walking into this trigger right as we open the map will pause the cutscene from happening, and we can delay it even further by going into our menu and visiting the title screen. The game will try to start the cutscene while trying to also load, which doesn't work out, so it crashes. That was just one of many ways to crash Breath of the Wild. There's a lot of glitches in the game. And while researching crashes, I realized there was something more we could do with these. So my next target was going to Target to crash the in-store demo of Breath of the Wild they have.
Go for it.
Alright, so we're gaming. We're gonna crash this thing. And hopefully everything goes fine. So what this does is it gives you 2 save files. One of them puts you in the forest with like some items, and the other just gives you the start, which is what I need. And now we wait. The speedrun started out just like any normal one, clipping out of bounds at target, clipping in bounds at target, and grabbing the spear and this sharp sword as we're going to be using it for cutting grass soon. We're also using a completely different glitch from crashing the regular game, which means we have to escape the plateau. And this is why you can't do this on portable mode, because this trick sucks on the Joy-Cons.
I straight up forgot about this trick.
This is a totally normal activity at Target.
That's fine.
That I'm gonna die. Okay, cool. The area we're at now is a small chunk of the overworld you can access before getting the glider, and we're here for fairies, which don't spawn on the plateau. They'll allow us to corrupt our inventory for crashing the game, but unfortunately are very rare. However, I got one almost immediately. The game's also running at That's really good RNG. We do need a second fairy before we leave. However, the second one wasn't as kind to me and took over 5 minutes to grab, which was an issue because the demo has a 20-minute time limit. I'm obligated to complain as much about my curse snare. Okay, we're golden. Oh, it's right there. Wow, what a convenient location for that to happen. And what we're gonna do is walk into this and hold a fairy. And the moment that he uses the first fairy, I'm gonna drop the second one. And that breaks a slot in the inventory, such that like there's gonna be holes and gaps that the game isn't gonna know how to deal with. So I'm gonna do the same thing again. And the effect I'm doing just stacks, so now I've broken 2 slots.
Are you breaking your entire inventory?
No, I need to break 2 to 3 slots. Yes, this is where things get weird. I need the game to not autosave. Please don't autosave. Good, okay. So now, when I reload, I'll have the 2 broken slots, and the game is going to try and bring over the potion that I just cooked into the save file. That has now broken the entire inventory. Okay, so I got the glitch, now I have to crash the game before the timer happens.
Well, you probably have about 30 seconds.
Jesus Christ. In the end, the time limit did get us. However, I could still do another run, as despite dozens of Target employees staring at us constantly, they didn't seem to mind. So I started another run, and...
Yo! Can clean. And that was also fairly close to the end of the demo.
It was almost the time limit. Oh, and yeah, it goes back to the menu.
Yeah.
God, that was so good. Link's Awakening. They made another version of this game, and it's got a completely different run. We start out the same as before, getting our sword and going into the forest, and doing all the intro things we need to do to enter the first dungeon. Once we're in there, we're gonna go all the way up to where we can get the dungeon item, the Rock's Feather, and then leave, as we don't actually need to finish this dungeon. And we're now gonna head towards the seconds where we're gonna crash the game. And to do that, we're gonna enlist the help of this Cucko. We're gonna grab this guy and take him all the way through the forest and to the swamp, and with the help of him and this lake, we're gonna get sense all the way up here. Thanks to this trick and the jumping ability that we have, we can now enter the second dungeon much earlier and make our way through to our real destination. The mid-boss in this dungeon has a glitch that we dearly want to activate, and once we get in there, we're gonna first do this precise setup and then get grabbed and thrown out of bounds, which crashes. If you've seen speedruns of this game, this trick might look familiar, as this is also how speedrunners skip the entire dungeon and go straight to the end. And it just so happens that if you pause during this maneuver, you'll instead crash the game. Okay, so Cadence of Hyrule, the game's broken. The game is ready to crash the moment you look at it. All that you need to do is start a new file, set it to puzzle mode, type in this exact seed, and once you're in the game, it's already dead. Turns out the lizards in this dungeon don't like touching the doors here, and thanks to a speedrunner, we have a seed that creates this exact scenario right from the start, which instantly breaks the game. That's it. Diving now into Age of Calamity, this game provides an opposite problem from the last game, as I ended up having a really hard time figuring out how to crash it. For all the games, I researched crashes, looking online, and asking the speedrun community, and I usually found some lead that I could use for the video. But for this game, I got nothing. There was no videos of crazy glitches in the game like crashing and burning afterwards. Nothing. So for this, I had to dig deep and dive into the official Nintendo patch notes. In here, the developers outline all the glitches they removed and possibly any features they added. And it turns out that for the game's Day 1 patch, they removed a couple of glitches that sound just like crashes. So if we just plug in our cartridge and force the Switch to play the 1.0 version, we can try and activate those glitches. And so after doing some testing, Here's what I ended up doing. We start up the game and speedrun through the first and second level, and once we're back in the map, we enter 2-player mode and enter a shop to sell some items. The menu where you sell items to merchants is one described in the patch notes as a little buggy, and indeed, if we just mash the A button really fast while we sell the items, the game will get stuck. We've now gotten rid of our cursor and have no way to go through the menu, and with no way to progress or leave, our game is just stuck here. This may not be a full crash, as the game is only permanently stuck, not crash, but considering this is a spin-off, I'll let it pass. Looping back to Skyward Sword with its remake, this version is unfortunately not as easy to crash as the original, due to them removing the title screen glitches. But luckily for us, this version doesn't remove any other glitches from the original other than that, meaning that all of the crashes from the Wii version are still fair game. I started this video thinking that the fastest crash you could get to was this one in Sandship, where you just shoot this gem in a room and get a crash. Big problem with that technique though is that we need to do several dungeons to get here. But after looking into it recently, I found out that just a few months ago, a speedrunner playing a randomizer managed to find a really quick and easy way to crash the game with just a bottle and a slime. With this in mind, I then started our run, grabbing the sword and getting our loft wing back before finishing the intro and getting ready to go down to the surface. But instead of going down there, we're gonna head to the markets where we can now get a bottle. This bottle is about to be the entire game's undoing, of course, and after filling up with some water from this pond, we can go into the waterfall cave, find a slime, and crash. This is such an easy crash to do. You can literally do it with any small slime in the game. I'm shocked it took over 10 years to be found, but it works. And with this, we can finally head on to Tears of the Kingdom. This game, as you may know, has a lot of glitches and crashing it isn't too hard. We first need to start and grab the sword and escape the cave and head to the top of the island, where we're now going to grab a stick and go to this column. What we're going to do is a bunch of glitches with this menu to try and partially despawn our stick, which puts the item in a weird limbo state so that when we go to grab it, the game dies. This glitch only works on the early versions of the game, such as 1.0, which is the version of the game you usually see for speedruns, as it's really buggy. But there's of course also ways to crash the game in the latest patch, so I went and did a run there too. After starting and heading back outside, we're going to change these up and grab these wings, and then dive down and watch all of these cutscenes. Once we're finally set free, we're going to take the wings and fly over to the snowy area, grab a chew, and then head into the cave. We were after this like at the end of the cave, and after setting up our ice chew as a trap, we end up recreating the exact scenario from 1.0, where we get a partially unloaded weapon, and grabbing it deletes the game. And ending off with the latest game, we have Echoes of Wisdom. This game may be new, but it got broken immediately upon release, and there's a well-known glitch you can use to wrong warp, which sometimes crashes. The run takes a little while to get going with all these cutscenes, but once we enter the overworld, we can finally have our fun. We're heading towards the first dungeon, making sure to grab a signpost and a trampoline, which we're going to need afterwards. The southern ruins are pretty easy to run through, especially when we have the spider, which we can use to cheese a lot of it. After taking out the boss, we unlock full access to the overworld, and we can finally wreak havoc on the game. We have to head over to the Lost Woods, or whatever they're calling it in this game, and once we're here, we can finally pull off the most maddening crash I can think of to finish the video. This trick is pretty simple. We're going to walk up to the signpost and get faded out at the same time, which stores the map. Triggering a fast travel with this ends up taking us somewhere random, usually one of the water areas, but sometimes a crash. And it's usually not a crash. This is actually pretty rare, and it's something I had to grind over and over again, and when the run was too slow, reset and repeat. This is truly the final boss of the entire video, but after enough time, I was able to get a run that got the trick 4th try, which was good enough for me, and finally defeat the last Zelda game. And there you have it. That's every Zelda game, every version and variant I could find, crash, with the sole exception of one. You may have noticed, you may have not, I featured it in the intro, like foreshadowing. Minish Cap is a game that exists, and I did not crash it because it appears to almost be uncrashable. Now I say almost, don't click away, the title was not clickbait. I did crash this game, but I wasn't recording, I wasn't able to recreate it, and it would appear that crashes in this game are generally that vibe. Not consistent, not something you can seek out, and just occasional occurrences. The closest this game has to a consistent crash is this one boss fight in the ice dungeon where there's a giant Octorok, and if you kind of just hang out in there, then there's a small chance that if you damage the Octorok, you'll crash. That's what I did, that's what I couldn't do again, and in its place, I'm going to still destroy this game in a more creative way. There's a glitch you can do with this turtle to enter out of bounds, and from there you can keep traversing out of bounds until you eventually leave the mountain. If you do this and save, what you end up with is a save file that will continually respawn stuck out of bounds with nowhere to go. Copy this 3 times over, and I've got a cartridge full of save files that are uncompletable. That's about as best as this game's gonna get, unfortunately, since we can't speedrun crashing it. But we did speedrun crashing everything else. This was a long project. This was basically my entire 2024 in terms of videos, and I couldn't have finished it without my friends, girlfriends, literally every single speedrunning Discord for these games. While I am quite good, actually, at speedrunning most Zelda games, the living written memory of people who speedrun these games and live in Discords is literally the only way I was able to speedrun crashing most of these. Even for games I'm good at, like Breath of the Wild, I didn't even know those crashes existed. The Discords made this video. So that's cool. Thanks to everyone who found those glitches and keeps talking about them. But with everything else finished up, all that we have left to do is tally up our runs and see which were the fastest.